when the U.S. government admits basically that we have no evidence that Iran is a national security threat to us, well, that should be taken very seriously because that's a statement against interest. But if you make statements that coincide with your interest, I think people need to be suspicious, especially in situations where we just don't have good sources of information directly. Again, very few people can go to Iran and see with their own eyes what's going on. So I think we need to be cautious. And above all, I think one needs to remember that in the past, official sources of information in the US government have lied as a means of generating public support for war. And it'd be very surprising to me if that weren't the case now. It'd be a dramatic break with history. There's only one exception I can think of where the US government did not overstate atrocities by the enemy state. That was World War II. When US propaganda, also British propaganda, actually, believe it or not, understated German atrocities. They were demonizing Germany. They were the enemy. They were committing atrocities. But the propaganda understated German atrocities. It did not mention things like the concentration camps, the mobile killing groups, the Einsatzgruppen, the Holocaust, as it's collectively known. I think most of the reason they didn't do that is because World War I, the German atrocities have been so overstated by official sources. They feared nobody would believe them if German atrocities again were brought up. And so I think that was a case of crying wolf, the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
But I think World War II, American propaganda during World War II is the only case I can think of where atrocities by the enemy state were not overstated. In every other case, that's typically how it's done. And it's virtually guaranteed that's happening here in Iran.
How much of it is a concern around being our policies of either being isolationist or being more interventionist, or a number of other ways that we treat our foreign policy? Because definitely it seems like we are doing a lot of things that are fraying our relationships, even with our allies. I'm thinking about tariffs. I'm thinking about a number of other things as well. And I know that there are efforts to try to calm some of those tensions and everything like that. But I'm wondering how much is that playing into the narrative, the way that it's being presented by the current administration? Because he's definitely presented it almost as it seems as if Iran could be the second target. I mean, Venezuela was clearly the first target and everything like that. And like I said, we're still trying to figure out what's going on with the trial and everything. And even though they captured the leader of Venezuela, the second in command is now in charge, even though to some degree the president says that he's in charge, even though that would be him running two countries and everything like that. But I'm just wondering your take on this whole notion of how it's playing out in the world stage, this whole notion of interventionism.
Well, it's very easy to look at Trump as really a dramatic break with the past. In some ways, he is. I mean, the idea of seizing Greenland, even talking about it, I've never heard of anybody talk like that. Sending his famous letter he just sent to the Norwegian ambassador saying that he'll be more warlike because you snubbed me by not giving me the Nobel Prize. I can't think of any other president who's ever spoken that way. That's historically unique. Stylistically, he's historically unique. Some of his actual policies certainly do diverge from the past. The open use of tariffs as a strategy and to do it systematically and enthusiastically, that's something that hasn't happened since before the New Deal. So there are some real divergences by Trump, both not only stylistically, but also substantively. But I don't think we should overstate them. When Trump said, for example, famously said he doesn't really care about international law, people were very shocked by that, but they shouldn't have been shocked. Because the U.S. policy has never really obeyed international law. The United Nations Charter forbids military action except in clear-cut cases of self-defense or when authorized by the Security Council. The U.S. has often violated the UN Charter, brazenly done so. And so I don't think we should be that shocked by Trump disregarding international law. I mean, the fact that he said it quite so brazenly, stylistically, that's new. But the basic idea of violating international law, that's not an innovation. So I think we need to be careful not to overstate the degree to which Trump is a break with the past. Because some of what he's doing, the interventions in Venezuela, of course, have clear precedents in American history going back to, Theodore Roosevelt and William McKinley. More clearly, of course, they remind us of the 1989 invasion of Panama, brazenly illegal international law, in which we also kidnapped the leader of the country, Manuel Noriega, and put him on trial. I'm not a lawyer, and so I can't really evaluate this at a purely legal level, but I find it almost hard to believe. I find it astonishing that it was possible to convict Noriega in a court of law in the United States, given the brazenly illegal way he was kidnapped. But then again, the American courts have always deferred to the executive on anything involving international relations. Bear in mind that the Constitution says treaties are the law of the land, and the UN Charter is part of a treaty. So when Bush invaded Panama in 1989, that was a violation of the Constitution. But again, the courts have deferred to presidents, as I said, on these types of issues. And so sort of legally laughable cases like the one against Noriega were actually brought to court and brought to trial, and he was convicted. As I'm sure Maduro will be convicted, because there's no way they would bring him to trial unless they could get a conviction. Despite the brazenly illegal way he was kidnapped.
Yeah, along those same lines, I brought in Dr. Sharif, and like I said, I brought in Rick as well, and they may have questions also. But Dr. Sharif also talks, because he comes from Bangladesh, about, as does one of the founders of the network, about how we don't hear enough about some of the conflicts that are going on in their part of the world and some of the coverage in that part of what's going on. And also he's working with his students to try to be, just like you are, a more peaceful world and all along those lines. But I just wondering, do you think that we pay enough attention to the Asian theater? You are a student of history and all along those lines, but I just wanted your take on how we're treating the Asian theater in terms of our policies. I mean, like I said, Iran is definitely part of that theater, but there are other countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan and a number of others. But I just wanted your take on how we're treating the global community, particularly those in Asia and Africa.
If you ask me, I just want to say in that way, honestly speaking, I do not see there is enough attention from Western world and Western media for these Asian communities. And if you see this present economic growth, the populations of Asia Pacific, and the political influence and the economical influence and cultural influence, what actually Professor David discussing on his speech. It's heavily creating positive impact in South Asia, in Asia Pacific. Asia is the future in terms of economics, in terms of culture, in terms of the 21st century's growth. Even if you see that Donald Trump, how aggressive he was regarding Venezuela president, he bring Venezuela president to USA. On the other hand, in terms of Iran, he is not active at all. Honestly speaking, it shows that Iran, even Khomeini, I do not support it. He killed more than 2,500 people, but still he alive and still he is in power. So this is clear indicators that Trump administrations, in terms of geopolitics and other, how they think about South America, they do not think the same way about Russia, Iran, China, and North Korean alignment, I want to say. They understand that these geopolitical issues and their everything is very powerful and it's almost impossible. And that is the things, it's clearly indicators that the Western world, even though in the media, they are not covering all of the things of these communities, but they have clear understanding their military arms related strength, their economical empower and all of the things. Final comments. There is a major issues regarding Islamophobia. If you see in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Middle East, in Malaysia and Muslim countries. But how I see these youth revolutions, what you say, the Gen Z revolutions, what is happening in Bangladesh or in Pakistan or in Indonesia and other countries, it's actually changed the mindset. Definitely, I want to give special thanks to USA because of the social media. Everybody is connected right now. And this huge population, the youth population, they are connecting right now. This Gen Z, with their political involvement in this emerging economy like Bangladesh, like Pakistan, like Malaysia, like India, it may change geopolitical mentality, and it will change this Islamophobia and this kind of culture. So that is the things. I think that USA has clear understanding about this Asian revolution, and hopefully, with the alignment of North America and European Union, Asian economic and social and political revolutions will move forward and make a very positive momentum for us. And definitely, I want everyone to contribute in these things. So I call it Silk Route 3.0. So Silk Route 3.0 will happen in this South Asia, in this Asia Pacific, but definitely we need modern science, engineering, and technology from Western world. That is my comment. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Hey, David, just really quick, and I just see your hand, Richard, Rick, and everything along those lines. But how much do you find that your students are engaged and interested in history and world politics and all along those lines? Because I know that one of the things, and part of the reason that Nick and Kim founded this particular network is because they are afraid that there are certain issues, whether it's fiscal literacy or other things that aren't discussed enough in our mainstream media, and they would like to see it more out there in terms of public discourse and everything like that. But I live not that far from Duke University, and I know that there are other universities here, whether it's UNC Central or NC State and a number of others. And I do have friends in the academic space, both as teachers and as students. As a matter of fact, my nephew is going to go off to college next year and everything. But I was just wondering, how much do you find that the students are actually engaged in these kind of conversations when you talk to them?
You're directing that question to me?
I am.
Okay. I find students right now are very obsessed with Donald Trump, for and against, most of them against. And it seems politics revolves around Donald Trump. It's revolved around Donald Trump in the United States. Again, I'm speaking from an American perspective here. For the last 10 years, that's all really we've been talking about. Too much in my view, but nevertheless, it's become such an obsession that what's going on in the rest of the world, Dr. Sharif mentioned Asia, obviously there's, that's just one thing basically that is off the radar screen for American college students because of the obsession with domestic politics. We always, in this country, it tends to be a bit parochial, it is true. And I think the parochialism has increased in the era of Donald Trump, given just the singular focus on that one issue. I don't think it's very healthy.
That makes sense. Rick?
So I was thinking about David's comment earlier about how you can't blame social media for all the misinformation we believe in. And I was thinking back to when I was a kid and the news landscape back then, where we had Time Magazine, Newsweek, and we had the nightly news. And that was, for national stuff, that was it. And we weren't as invested in it. And I remember I grew up in a Republican household, but my dad was a small businessman in a small town, and most of his, information and points of view came from him bantering with dozens, maybe hundreds of friends and neighbors, every day. There was a lot of verbal interaction, and the other information was more sparse and slow. If somebody was trying to recruit you to the John Birch Society, which was a hard right-wing organization, they had to do it over the mail. They couldn't even get you on the phone because long distance cost money. And now we are, so it's such a smaller percentage of the opinions and information we get from face-to-face talk with people. If my dad started believing in crazy crap, his neighbors would bust his balls about it. And now we get so much more messaging from people who aren't our friends, people who are semi-anonymous to us.
Yeah. Hey, David, what brought you, and I'm going to bring in the founder that I mentioned earlier. This is Nick Palveda, the founder or one of the founders of the network and all along those lines. But what brought you into this whole space of studying history and studying the interventionists, particularly around Iran? But what brought you into being interested in this particular field of study? It is a very narrow field of focus. Not saying that that's a bad thing, because a lot of times people have a interest in field of focus, whether it's like John Hope Franklin was very much interested in world studies and all along those lines when he was living. But I just wondered, what brought you into this particular interest of this particular part of the world?
Again, it's directed towards me. Is that right, Mark?
That is correct.
All right. I grew up as a child, basically, during the Vietnam War, and I remember the Vietnam War very well, and the conflicts over the Vietnam War. I remember when I was 13, the publication of the Pentagon Papers, made available by Daniel Ellsberg, and I remember the controversy surrounding that. I remember in 1975, when I was in high school, the Senate launched these massive investigations of the Central Intelligence Agency and covered what at the time at least seemed astonishing information about CIA involvements, for example, in assassination plots, in spreading disinformation, in launching coups, in violating laws, and so on. And so I think that was the context in which it sort of forged an interest in international relations and gave me a somewhat skeptical eye for official information.
Hey, speaking of that, yesterday we celebrated MLK's birthday and everything, and there was a government directive. It seemed like it was very similar to the misinformation that we're getting now. It was called COINTELPRO, and it was definitely under the direction of the FBI, but I'm sure the CIA and others were involved as well. So I just wanted your take on whether this is something that's been going on in government pretty much maybe even since the days of Washington and all along those lines. But we are celebrating the 250th anniversary. But like I said, yesterday we celebrated MLK, and he was definitely a target of COINTELPRO, as was members of the Black Panthers and others as well. But I just wondered how much of what we're seeing with Iran and the misinformation similar to what was going on in the 60s. And that's for you, David.
Well, I think one of the things we've had in the United States is a very undemocratic secret government of intelligence services. And the CIA wasn't the first. The first major one, of course, was the FBI, founded by J. Edgar Hoover after World War I, which engaged in, Harry Truman, it privately called it our Gestapo. That's what he said about the FBI. And yes, of course, it launched a massive operation against Martin Luther King, an effort to not only discredit him, but to possibly drive him towards suicide. It didn't work. And so, I think what's most problematic about these types of agencies is they're secretive and they're therefore unaccountable. And they operate in a fashion the public doesn't even know about. And it's still a legacy very much with us today. We've never really cleaned out this essentially totalitarian blot on an otherwise democratic system. And so I think that's part of what we're dealing with here is agencies of government that are dedicated basically to putting out this information. Again, if you're in the CIA, you're trained to do that.
Yeah. How much are you following what's going on with ICE as well? Because there's a lot of disinformation around that also. But I just wondering, David, if you've been following that story, because that's the other major thing that's been going on in the country, whether it's Minneapolis or whether it's Chicago or DC. But I just wonder, how much does the disinformation play into the conversation around the impact of immigrants on our society? Because I know that there have been entire businesses that have been cleaned out. Matter of fact, I was talking to one friend. They said they went to a store. I think it might have been a fish store or something else that usually would have had a lot of Latin Americans working there, and it was totally empty because of the fear of ICE. But I just wondered how much of that disinformation is playing into that conversation as well, David.
Well, I think if you look at what's going on in Minneapolis right now, the shooting of Good and so on, and Trump's reaction to the shooting of Good, more or less endorsing it, I think what you're seeing here is the effects of American overseas policy. America overseas has always acted this way in a lawless fashion, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that it affects domestic politics as well. Tucker Carlson, I'm not a fan of Tucker Carlson, but he sometimes says intelligent things. And what he said was that, what you're seeing is a desensitization of violence. He condemned the shooting of Good and said you're seeing a desensitization of violence in the public resulting from overseas violence. And if you do that overseas, inevitably it's going to come back to haunt us domestically. I think that's what's happening there.
Yeah.
So, as a professor, you see Gen Z all the time in classrooms. How is Gen Z's ability to deal with misinformation? Are they better at seeing through BS than previous generations, or what? and how do they parse the world? Like, there's one more Gen Z. People think Gen Z they don't talk much, that they're too busy on their phones. Do you see any of this? Does this have any impact?
Well, I think that there's a very big partisanship among students. They reflect the larger partisanship in the country. And my students are mostly anti-Trump. At least the ones who are pro-Trump don't speak up so much. There is a kind of, there's no doubt, there's a climate on the university that is hostile to Trump. I'm not a fan of Trump either, so I can understand that, but I just note this as a fact. And so they tend to see it in partisan terms. Factual information that reflects well on their side is true. Factual information that reflects badly on their side must be false. And so there is a tendency to look at this issue of misinformation through a partisan lens. And I see that as a national tendency. And I see that in my students as well. I try to veer away in my classes from partisanship just because I don't find it's a useful way to teach. It's a way to instill dogmatism. And again, in no way is this in any way a defense of Donald Trump or the ugly things he's doing in Minneapolis or elsewhere, but just to note that the partisan tendency to define truth in terms of what's good for my side as opposed to their side, to think of it in tribal terms, I think that's very much taken hold nationally, and I think even more so on university campuses.
What do you think about the possibility of third parties and even creating new systems? I know that here on the network, we've got David Walker, who is a member of No Labels. And it seems like a lot of times people don't think that those have any chance of actually getting inroads and all along those lines. In your take as a historian as to whether you think that we'll ever get away from the Democratic Republican partisanship that you're talking about and everything like that, and whether there can be a third party that can take hold, and whether that's something that you and your students study at all.
I do sense there is a desire for a third party, a very strong desire in the public, and especially among young people. There is a perception, I think accurate, that the two-party system has become completely ossified and dysfunctional. I think the dysfunction is there for all to see, but I see it more as a dysfunction on both sides of the aisle here. And so it would be very welcome to have a third party. Of course, as everyone knows, it's very difficult to found and sustain the third party. There are many, many efforts to found third parties. And ever since the last time we had a third party that was successful was the Republican Party, the party of Lincoln. That's the last time. Every other effort has failed. And so I don't really know what the answer is. I don't really have a snappy answer as to how you break out of that vise, the two-party vise, except to note that it seems to be becoming more and more dysfunctional over time, and much of what you're seeing in terms of the extraordinary tensions, and I have to be frank here, the possibility of mass violence in the United States, comes out of the fact that the party system just isn't working anymore.
Hey, just really quickly, I'm thinking Rick's got his hand up, and I want to hear some of Nick's comments, who's, like I said, one of the founders of the network and everything like that. But I am an observer of professors and others, and I did notice you got several pictures behind you and all along those lines, David. So I just wondering if those pictures have any story, maybe of students or maybe of historical things that you've been involved in and all along those lines. But I did notice that you got a pretty good book collection.
No, they're family pictures, actually, members of my family.
Okay, that's cool. Well, that's always a good way to get good comfort in your job and all along those lines. Rick, you had a question?
Yeah, the right accuses universities of being hotbeds of liberalism. Yeah, okay, so you're already shaking. I think that universities are hotbeds of people, having other things to do besides like engage in political debate. You're at the U of A, the sun shines there like 350 days a year, and people are, there are, I'm sure bars all over the place, and that plus half the students at every college are taking STEM. And I took STEM, and I did. People don't talk about politics in a STEM course. So, what do you think?
Well, I think it's a myth that colleges are, radical Marxist, socialist, even liberal. I think that reflects cultural issues, things like drag queen story hour, gender neutral pronouns. If you want to call that radical, okay, well, that's pervasive at the university level. Okay, identity politics, gender, race, and sexuality, it's everywhere. And that is true. But if you look at things like economics and foreign policy, universities are very conservative places. You have Free market economics basically is very influential in economics departments. You have massive amounts of money pouring in from the Koch family and from other billionaire sources trying to subsidize free market economics at the university level. The U.S. foreign policy establishment is everywhere at the university level. The CIA has major influence in the universities. Homeland Security is there. And I got my doctorate in political science, not history, at MIT. And MIT was closely interconnected with the Central Intelligence Agency, including especially the political science department. So I think when people talk about, the radicals, the socialists, when faculty themselves talk about how radical the universities are, it's just a lot of fluff.
Hey, speaking of a lot of fluff, and you do have that political background, and Nick now lives in Spain. He was one of the founders, and he had some times that he was at Miami. I know he's regretting that the University of Miami lost the championship, even though it was a valiant effort and all along those lines. But I just wanted your take on this move, because there's been a push, I would say, during COVID for a lot of people to be expatriates, whether that was moving to Canada, whether that was moving to France, whether that was doing like Nick did and moving to Spain. And like you said, we all can't afford even going to Iran to see directly what is going on. But I just wondered, are you seeing a lot of students that are coming to you from other countries and that want to return? Because even here at Duke, I've met people from China that were getting their education and then wanted to return back to the Chinese mainland or to Taiwan in some cases and everything like that. But then I've also seen people that literally have wanted to move to those countries to live and everything. So I just wondered, what is your observation of students that are in this expatriate movement? David.
Oh, me? Well, I mean, it affects me personally. My son actually is relocated permanently to the Netherlands. He lives there permanently. And I think part of it, somebody's giving a thumbs up. Yeah, I mean, part of it is the United States has become just too dysfunctional. Things just don't work here. I mean, I just look at Tucson. The streets are in terrible shape. It's not a safe city, but it's typical of American cities, basically.
Right. Yeah, I relocated I bought a place here in Barcelona, so I moved here about a year and a half ago. And part of it is because I like history. So when I saw your background in history, I love history, but right now it's a luxury I can't afford. But years ago, I couldn't afford to go to these cities. And in Barcelona, the end of this week, I'm going to Turkey. I'm going to Istanbul and Ephesus, mainly because you can see the temple at Artemis. You can see Mary's house. I mean, there's all sorts of history over here that the problem that I have in the United States is your history goes back a couple hundred years and that's about it. Here, they go back thousands and thousands of years. I just find it extremely fascinating. But it doesn't surprise me your son likes the Netherlands, because one thing I tell people here in Spain, and I live in Barcelona, the crime is like 1/6 that of the United States. People have no idea. And I'm going to the U.S. again because I fly back and forth. I'll be in the U.S. in next month, and then the following month I'm going to be in Venice, and then in Vienna the next month. But every time I go back to the U.S., I'm scared to death. I'm going to go to L.A. I'm going to me it's like crime city everywhere you go. But in Europe, I feel safe. So I just I don't know. I'll tell you what's going on right now here in Europe for people that don't know. The people here are going crazy about Trump because Greenland, it's like he committed a sacrilege to even suggest he's going to take Greenland. Everybody here is up in arms, and people don't know how big the European Union is. We got 420 million people. It's probably the second or third largest economy in the world, and this guy treats us like we're dung, and that's just absolutely not true. And the problem also here, the people are very nice and very professional, unlike they view the United States to be a bunch of yahoos, coming off a ranch somewhere, which, by the way, given what I see the political climate over there, it might be true. So congratulate your son for moving to the Netherlands. That's on my list in June, where I'm going to go to Amsterdam because they have the Rijksmuseum, and it just looks like a great city to be in. I think it's good move. Let's put
just really quickly, I do see your hand again, Rick, and everything. But What is something that you were shocked about? Because I mean, we have perceptions of Iran. I mean, there's the whole notion of the Shah, because people remember the Shah back in the day and everything like that. And there's some people, I guess, that want to return back to the days of the Shah. And then, of course, there's the Ayatollah and all along those lines. But as one that has studied Iran and some of this misinformation, what is something that has surprised you about in your own knowledge of Iran, David and Professor Dave? So what's something that has actually surprised you that you've learned about Iran that you were not expecting when you were doing your political science research?
Well, Iran has a formidable military capability, especially in missiles, and I think one of the reasons Trump decided not to strike them again, one of the reasons the Israelis didn't strike them again, is that in the 12-day war launched by Israel against Iran, in which the U.S. participated, by the end of that war, Iran had the upper hand. Israel was not able to intercept Iranian missiles, which were doing a lot of damage to Israel's infrastructure. Had it continued much longer, Israel would have suffered very substantial damage, and that's why they sought a ceasefire. And I think that's why you've not seen a return to a military attack. I think there was an effort. The Israeli press has had articles about how the Israelis, and I assume also the CIA, has given a lot of support and direction to the rioters in Tehran. And that's not to say there isn't domestic opposition that's organic. There is, but there's no doubt the Israelis and probably the U.S. were supporting it directly by intervention. And so I think that that failed. The Iranians managed to retain control of their country, the Iranian government, I should say. Again, I'm not a fan of the Iranian government. I never liked them. But the idea that they should be changed through foreign coercion, to foreign intervention, strikes me as an illegal act and a blatantly illegitimate act. I mean, we don't like it when other countries intervene in our politics, or even when there's any hint of that happening. And imagine what the Iranians feel about it. We overthrew the government in 1953. We brought the Shah to power. There's a long history here. And so I think that I was surprised, nevertheless, at the formidable Iranian military capability, which was much greater than I expected.
Dr. Sharif is from Bangladesh, and he had a comment. So, Dr. Sharif, maybe you should go up.
Yeah, this is interesting discussions when you discuss about Gen Z, and I run World Talent Economy, so I do more focus on the youth in South Asia and other part of the world. Two important aspects it's actually impressed by this youth of Bangladesh and other countries, how they involving with the politics. That is the things I think it may happen in the future in USA and North America and Canada and other countries. Because how I see through the social media, this youth, this Gen Z, they are very connected. And they're well aware. They have a clear vision that what they want to do. Look, let's say next month we have our elections, and we already get third party through the youth, because youth build up their own political party. They get huge popularity. They join with some sort of right-wing politicians, and they run even the government in our countries. The youth, they run the government. They're under 30 years old. And how I see they are very successful compared to the old, I'm sorry to say, we had all of the old, corrupted, uneducated politicians in our countries. But how I see this educated youth and the young politicians, what you call Gen Z, they run the different ministry, like ICT ministry, like sports ministries, and information and communication technologies, or some other ministries. They are performing well. They're performing good compared to the old and corrupted politicians. So that is the symbol that if this Gen Z get opportunity, they can change even political system. And that is the thing, Professor David, you can bring in your classroom. Gen Z actually very powerful, very knowledgeable. You have to give them authority, right mentorship and guideline, and even they can come as a policymakers, as a politicians, and they can contribute a lot. And this is the interesting things I'm observing from Bangladesh. Next month, 12th of February, we have election. I'm sure many Gen Z communities, they come to the parliaments, and they will go to the parliament, and they will make our parliament very productive, because they will challenge the old politicians. They will challenge them, and that is the interesting movement, an interesting opportunity to learn. So it may happen in the USA in the future.
Yeah, appreciate that and everything. Hey, Professor David, and all along those lines, we've also been joined by Jatovi, and he's got a lot of things going on, including an AI conference that he is forming here in the Durham area and all along those lines. But I was just wondering, how much are you concerned, even in your students, with the use of AI? Because we know sometimes they use AI maybe a little bit too much, whether it's ChatGPT or some of the other more modern forms like Gemini and stuff like that. But I just wondering, as a professor, how concerned are you about your students using AI, and how do you make sure that they're not abusing it?
Well, where it comes really into play is the issue of writing papers. If I give them an assignment to write a paper, a research paper, or an opinion paper, or whatever it may be, uh, usually it's going to be written by AI, which strikes me as a form of cheating that's untraceable. And as a result of that, I give either in-class assignments where they can't use AI, or if I give them a paper, they're only permitted to use what I give in lecture, and they're forbidden to use anything other than my lecture, because AI doesn't know what I'm giving in lecture. And so that's how I've dealt with it. I don't know other faculty are dealing with it. I think some faculty just let it slide, and they accept papers from students knowing full well they weren't written by the students, and pretend to grade them as if they were grading student papers. And myself, I just feel like that's not a way to teach, because you're not really learning how to write if you're having AI write your papers.
So libs on social media love to compare today in America to 1930s Germany, including myself. But as a historian, what do you think of people drawing parallels? Are they legit?
I think there's definitely a lot of reason to be worried about the future of the country, the future of the world in a lot of different ways. And I see Trump as more of a symptom of a sort of ossified political system rather than the main cause. Obviously, he's doing a lot of very dysfunctional, destructive things, but I don't see him as really the problem. I see him as a representation of a larger problem. When you look at the people who came to power in Germany in 1933, these were very disciplined people. The Nazis had a clear plan. They were very disciplined in implementing that plan. And they actually showed a high level of competence in doing it. They were step by step by step by step. I don't see that anything like that kind of competence among Trump and his entourage. Trump definitely has a nose for politics. He's able to sniff out public opinion long before anyone else does. He certainly has his talents. But coming up with coherent plans and operationalizing those plans and doing it with discipline, showing discipline about anything, is foreign to him. But I really don't see anything like, Germany in 1933. That to me seems very far-fetched. What I could see, and I think we're on the verge of it now, is mass violence, in which, let us say, Trump sends federal troops into Minneapolis or some other city, and then there's a counter demonstration, and let's say somebody starts shooting, and then the troops shoot back. What happens then? Or let us say some vigilante group comes and as a demonstration against ICE, a vigilante group comes with guns. We have lots of guns in this country, everybody knows, including automatic weapons, and start spraying bullets. I fear that that's the next possibility. So I could see nihilistic violence on a large scale as a real possibility here. I have to say, historically, it's sometimes compared the divisiveness we have in this country. It's compared to the 1960s, but the 1960s wasn't that bad by comparison. And what was different in the late 60s is the economy was growing. Because the economy was growing, and you still had a relatively prosperous economy, and people still held to the idea that children would do better than they did, that was a somewhat comforting factor that I think weighed against mass violence. We don't have that now. The economy is no longer in a state of prosperity. That's over. Those days are over. The idea that you'll get generational mobility, that's over in America. And so I see this as perhaps the most divisive period and the most potentially violent period we've seen since maybe the 1850s.
So you said that Trump's a symptom of an ossified political system. Is there any way out of that?
I would like to see kind of a mass movement in favor of a redistribution of wealth in the United States. I think one of the basic problems you have is the concentration of wealth. And you don't really have any ability to address that concentration of wealth because both parties seem committed to maintaining it. You don't really have a workers' party in any meaningful sense of that term. The Democratic Party is nothing like that, never has been. And it's become even less so over time. And so I think that if there were some kind of mass movement in favor of economic equality, I think that would be better. I think one of the things that's distracting the United States is the cultural issues, the culture wars. And people like to blame that on just Trump and the Republicans, but I think both sides are playing this game of culture wars. I think the left, or what passes for a left in America, is very much driving the culture wars just as much as the right is. And so I think the distraction of the culture wars is one of the major dysfunctions we have now. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is to that.
Jacoby, you had a question, but you're on mute, so I think I saw your hand up.
So as a historical example, because I think, yes, talking about, or just wanting to get back to that, because one of the things that you had spoke of earlier was the desensitization of what's going on, and then add in the pockets of violence, which I completely agree with that. Trump really is a representation of the problem, more so than the symptom. And so with those pockets of violence, my, analogy that comes to mind when thinking about it, more so than, Nazi Germany, because I agree, it's very, what's going on is it's not, it's poorly led. It's very disorganized. But what I see more so than that is if you go into the history of what brought about the Green Book and what minorities had to do in terms of navigating the country, that's where I see the pockets of violence, and how at some point, because right now it seems he's utilizing the pulpit to desensitize people to those, or desensitize the violence towards those who disagree, especially minorities or anybody with melanin, and also women. So it seems like there are pockets of violence that are going to start surrounding, historically the minorities who've been attacked in the first place, but also those white individuals, white males who agree with those minorities on a larger scale. That's why I don't know if that's an analogy that you see as well, that we may end up with a Green Book to navigate the U.S. for those who disagree with the MAGA and the Trump ideals.
I don't want to dominate the conversation too much, but anybody else like to comment?
No,
Go ahead and make your comments and everything. We're going to wind up, but I'd love to hear your comments, David, and everything. We're going to go. One question I had for you really quickly is, how much do you buy the figures, because we're going to do the Ukraine show very shortly, the figures that you're getting from Ukraine and Russia, and does that parallel to what's going on in what we're hearing from Iran?
My sense of things, if you look carefully, there's no question Russia's going to win the war, and there's nothing that can be done about that. I think there's an effort to sort of deny the facts, but the facts are there for all to see. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, said, and it was kind of a Freudian slip a few months ago, that Russia produces 3 times more artillery shells than all of NATO combined. In a land war, that's very significant. In a land war, the side that has the most artillery usually wins. And 3 times more, that's a lot. That's a lot. John Mearsheimer, a leading expert on war, University of Chicago, thinks it might be higher than 3-1. And so that, to me, alone indicates Russia's winning the war. There's claims Russia's economy is about to collapse. You can look at the International Monetary Fund, the figures they have for projections of growth. Russia's economy isn't about to collapse. It's not doing great, but it's doing okay. My sense is basically that there's nothing short of nuclear war that'll stop Russia from winning this war. And the sooner I think the West comes to terms with that fact and faces reality, the better off we'll be. I did want to very briefly just, I don't know. I want to respond to what Jacoby said. So I agree with most of it. I think we shouldn't oversimplify things, though, that it's worth bearing in mind. There's no doubt that racism, hostility towards people of color, that was a significant part of the Trumpian alliance and Trump's appeal. It is more complicated, though, because if you look at the last election, Trump got a lot of votes from people of color. I think among Latinos, I think it was close to 45% of Latinos voted for Trump. That's high. And even among African Americans, it was high. I mean, it was, I think among black people, black men under 40, I believe it was a third voted for Trump. That's very high historically. So, there's something about, I think class has something to do with this also. Trump has a very blue collar style, and he's very hostile to what he calls political correctness, woke, whatever you want to call it. My sense that plays well with working people. And that is part of, there's a culture, there's a perception of a culture of disrespect towards working people, and Trump plays into that. Let me say, I think that culture, that perception is a real perception. I think that's a real problem, that the mainstream culture disparages working people, and it should come as a surprise to no one that they don't appreciate it. And Trump, with his crazy verbiage, plays into that. Now, of course, his policies have been terrible for working people, but the culture wars, once again, seem to be driving things here, and Trump rationality.
So what does victory for Russia entail? Taking the whole country or just taking the 20% it holds?
No, I don't think they'll take the whole country. I don't think that was ever on the agenda. The idea of them invading Europe, I think that's just a fantasy. I think the problem with occupying the whole country is I think that the Russian leadership, beginning with Putin, remembers Afghanistan, remembers Eastern Europe, and how expensive and destructive that was. They don't want to occupy people who don't want them. I think what they want to do is occupy the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine. I think that's a legal act, by the way, and I think everybody should deplore how this is playing out. Although, again, I think this could have been solved diplomatically, and so I very much am critical of the West for not taking the diplomatic off-ramps that were offered many, many times along the way. So I see much blame to go around here, but the basic fact is that Russia's going to win, and there's nothing that can be done about that. And that will entail.
And we're going to have to go because we're at the hour. And believe it or not, our next show comes from Kyiv, Ukraine. It's called Russia, Ukraine, and China. And the thing is, it's actually broadcast out of Kyiv. And we'll see you next time on the World Edition. Until then, everybody, I say stay safe. That would be best.
Thank you.